Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. The brain is the most complex organ in our body. It's a network of billions of cells, all protected by the bones of the skull. The typical brain weighs only about 3 pounds, but it is the source of most of the qualities that make you who you are. For all these reasons, the brain is one of the most fascinating areas of research. And our guest today is a researcher whose work focuses on how aging, menopause, dementia, and cancer affect the brain in women. I am so pleased to introduce Julie Dumas with the Department of Psychiatry at the UVM Larner College of Medicine, where she is the co-director of the Clinical Neuroscience Research Unit. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It is so great that you're doing research on menopause. There's just not much out there, right?
Yeah, there's people have done research for a number of years, but we certainly don't know all the answers, so there's a lot more to do.
Okay. And your focus is really on the brain.
Exactly.
So how does menopause change the brain?
Right, so folks may not think of the brain when you experience menopause. So menopause happens at an average age of about 51 or 52 for women. And in menopause, the ovaries stop making estrogen, pregnancy does not occur, and there's a number of other effects that happen to the brain. So women may experience hot flashes, or mood changes, or changes in cognition. So I have a slide, and this slide shows that about 100 years ago, the life expectancy from women was about the same age of menopause, so around age 50. But in the last 100 years, because of advances in science and medicine, life expectancy for women has approached about age 80, but the age of menopause remains the same. So women are living an extra 30 years of their lives in a different hormonal environment, and we want to understand this. We want women to live as successful an aging experience as possible, and the brain and sort of the change in hormones is an important part of that story.
Absolutely. So that's so interesting. So there are all these years we live without those hormones happening.
Exactly.
That didn't used to happen.
Exactly, and hormones are powerful modulators. You mentioned all the cells in the brain. Hormones do really powerful things at these really micro or cellular levels that affect their higher level thinking and cognition and mood. So your brain had been bathed in hormones for about 35 years, and now it's changed. It's not a sudden change. It might take 10 years for menopause to officially occur.
Right.
And the official definition of menopause is not having a period or a menstrual cycle for 1 year. So after that time, then you know you're officially postmenopausal, and all these symptoms and perhaps not fun things are perhaps occurring.
And keep going.
Exactly,
for
perhaps,
quite some time.
Who knows how long? I think there's a lot of variability in how long these symptoms continue on or when they stop. So we're trying to understand how long they stop, what's normal, what's okay. We're still trying to figure that out.
Right, and what about, a lot of women use hormone replacement therapy. Is that the answer?
So that makes a lot of sense. So if you have these hormones for most of your life and then they go away, why don't we just give them back and replace them? That seems like a reasonable thing to do. However, there have been large studies, maybe in the early 2000s, that show it doesn't really, there are some issues with the types of hormones that are used and for how long you prescribe them. So the one thing we know is that physicians are not going to prescribe them for the brain. So these hormones that you give after menopause and hormonal therapy don't appear to, in general, for most women, improve memory and cognition. What they are good for is for control of hot flashes and the menopausal symptoms. They're really the best thing for that. So I think women are still prescribed the hormones to control those symptoms, because sometimes they're so bad that they may affect your life and your work life, your family life, and it's debilitating, really.
Right.
But the thing that I study, my research focuses on the memory and the brain. And what we have shown is that the estrogen, you can give estrogen back, and there are probably some people who estrogen will be good for and some people who it will not, based on family history of maybe risk of breast cancer. So anyway, we're trying to figure out who it's good for and for how long. So it's still a work in progress.
So it's very complicated. Well, it's funny, for me, hot flashes weren't that much of a problem. I mean, I get them, but so what? But sleep was really an issue, and sleep also affects the brain and cognition. Is there anything you are understanding about the sleep issues?
Yeah,
and what
so
to do with that?
sleep is really affected by the hormone change, or perhaps the hot flashes, or maybe we have them at night. I think they're called night sweats, and just this disruption of sleep. Sleep is this very therapeutic thing. It helps the brain consolidate memories or experiences you've had all day. It also helps as a sort of recycling or garbage disposal. So it takes these, the brain is working, all these things are made in the brain that need to be disposed of, and that happens during sleep. And so if this sleep is disrupted, there are effects the next day. And you might have experienced these at any age, and everybody does.
Right,
You have a
sure.
bad night of sleep, you're not good. You're, you know, it's difficult to do whatever you're doing the next day. So sleep is really important as well. But it is disrupted at menopause.
And so that complicates your studies, I would imagine. So, and what happens to mood and emotions in women? A lot of people talk about that, and oh, it's just women's stuff. But where do you fit the whole mood issues?
That's another big story here. So women, if I have another slide, a second slide here, that shows that after puberty and before menopause, women have a much greater risk of having depression compared to men. And when we see in science that there are differences between men and women, one thing we think about is hormones. That's a big difference between men and women. So we think the hormone story is a big explanation for what this difference implies. And since we're talking about menopause, you can see at the end of the graph toward the right side, there's something that's not shown in the graph, is that women are much more likely to have a first episode depression around menopause. So women who haven't had any depression are more likely to have a first episode depression around menopause. And if you've had a depression earlier in life, it's again, your likelihood is increased when the hormones are changing. So it's something about the hormone change at menopause, the fluctuations going up and down your brain, trying to kick in your ovaries, trying to get the ovaries to do the thing that they had been doing. This is bad for mood, and depression is a serious condition. Really does need some follow-up with a physician.
But it also looks like, you know, if you get over it, your mood is fine.
Exactly. Who knows? I'm not sure it's really fine, and who knows exactly when. Who knows exactly the critical issue is when is it fine? When does everything adapt? So we have this hormone change. The hormones fluctuate for maybe 10 years around menopause, and then things settle down. The brain adapts. We start maybe after menopause. Then we start talking about aging, and the brain is it's adapting to aging, hopefully, but things also start changing in a declining way. But we hope that after the hormonal fluctuations are settled down, that the mood things also settle down as well.
So is there a relation with decreased cognition or dementia and impairment after menopause? So you started going there, but it's probably hard to tell, because there's the aging issue.
Exactly. So that is a complicated question. So if menopause happens around age 50, women are not really impaired after menopause. So right around menopause, 50 to 55, there's no real great impairment compared to women who are maybe a little bit younger, maybe 45. There's not a real decline. Well, what people do notice is what's called subjective decline. So women report feeling, I just can't remember names, or I'm not as good at remembering the things I planned to do this week. I forgot to do this that was due today. And that might happen anytime, but people report that a lot more around menopause. In our studies, we give people memory tests. Here, remember this list of words, please, and then tell them to me. We show that they actually don't perform poorly on the memory test. So it's this difference of subjective complaints versus objective performance. The objective performance is fine, but the subjective complaint is not.
Interesting. So you think you're kind of losing it, but you're really not.
Exactly. You're right. And so I say this around menopause. This happens a lot. We've shown studies about 90% of some women in one of my recent studies. We've shown this subjective complaint. And it is important to pay attention to in the older ages. So there are other studies, and some of my work, we've shown that in around age 70, having subjective complaints is actually a risk for dementia. So it's something, we think, well, you're just worrying, you're just complaining about things. But it is something we should pay attention to, and really, maybe we are good detectors of our own health. So it's not just complaining, we are noticing some change that eventually might be shown on a memory test or on some formal testing.
So kind of keep an eye on it. Well, your research does use brain imaging and MRIs. What are we learning from those kinds of tests?
Exactly.
Maybe things are okay.
Hopefully. We do have, we do use MRI research and MRI methods in my research. And this is a picture of a study we did a number of years ago looking at menopausal women with subjective cognitive complaints or decline compared to women with no complaints. So what's important here is that both groups of women performed the same on the memory test. So no one was impaired, everyone performed the same. What these orange colors show, they show that there's increased blood flow or increased activity in the brain for women in the cognitive complaint group compared to women in the no complaint group. So what we've hypothesized here, we conclude, is that women who, in these groups, women are performing the test the same, but the women with complaints have to use more areas of the brain to perform the same as the women without complaints. So you have to use extra brain area, sort of akin to using extra muscles to perform the test the same.
Well, that sounds like kind of a good thing. You're exercising another part of the brain.
Exactly. It does sound like a good thing. And I guess the question is, in these 55-year-old women, what happens when they're 75? Does that maintain a good thing, or is it maybe a predictor of decline? And we don't know that answer. We haven't, not saying it is, we haven't followed these women. I would love to do that study, but we haven't done that yet.
So then what do you suggest, since we're still in the midst of really understanding this, for women who have concerns about memory or thinking or...
Right. Yeah, so if you really do have concerns, if you're not, just don't feel as good as you used to, you should certainly talk to your doctor. And you know, this is the forefront of the research, so it may be something that your physicians may not be aware of as real. So that's something, you know, you should, you know, pay attention to what you're sensing in your body, and, you know, don't let that go. If there are issues with mood, if you're feeling depressed, we certainly recommend seeing somebody about that. Yeah, so just seeing your doctor. But if we're not talking about clinical levels of these things, it's just keeping the brain healthy like we would our bodies. So the thing, it's not my research, but the best thing is exercise. Everyone says exercise, but it really is the best thing. There's research showing it's good for the brain. Weightlifting, from aerobic exercise, all of those things look good. And healthy diet, and blood pressure and blood glucose. So all of the, you know, just general health things are the same for the brain.
Are really important. Okay, so we'll keep doing those things. So what future research studies or programs for support might you be doing, and how do people stay in touch with you?
We have a website, and we just received some funding from the National Institutes of Health, the National Institute of Aging, to look at how some individual predictors of women at menopause might relate to risk for dementia. So we're still working on the ethics approvals. We're not doing anything. We're not running the study right now, but we're about to get that started.
So that might happen. We can keep
exactly.
touch. Thank you so much, Julie Dumas. We'll get you back in and find out more when you have that study going.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Okay, and thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard.